Joining us here today. My name is Terry Allen, and I'm one of the staff here in the Office of Community Air Protection, or OCAP for short. Before we begin, please allow me to give some general instructions on how to participate in this meeting for those who aren't familiar. A copy of the presentation is posted on our website, and we will also provide a link to this presentation in the chat. This meeting is being interpreted and recorded in Spanish, and both the English and Spanish recordings will be available on our website after the meeting. Next, we'll go over how to turn on the interpretation services. Interpretation services are being offered for today's session. This workshop is being interpreted in Spanish, and closed captioning is also available. To select your language, click on Interpretation, which is the globe icon at the bottom of the Zoom window, and select Spanish. To access live transcription, click More, which is also located on the menu at the bottom of your screen. I will now have our interpreter, Mark, relay the same instructions in Spanish.
Muy buenas tardes a todos que nos acompañan y que desean escuchar el programa en español. Se ofrecen servicios de interpretación para la sesión de hoy y el taller también está siendo grabado y hay subtítulos disponibles. Para seleccionar su idioma, por favor, seleccione el botón que dice Interpretation o interpretación, que verá con un icono de un globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla, y seleccione su idioma Spanish o español. Y para acceder a la transcripción en vivo, seleccione el botón que dice More o Más y aparece con 3 puntitos en la parte inferior de su pantalla y podrá entonces ver la transcripción en vivo para el programa de hoy. Please note, interpretation services are being offered for today's session. To listen to any comments or questions that are given in Spanish, please do the same. Select the globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation, and then select your language, English. You'll then be able to hear a live rendering of any comment or question from Spanish into English. Thank you, Terry. Back to you.
Thank you, Mark. So this slide shows a quick overview of how to use the Zoom features. Using the controls at the bottom of the window, you can mute or unmute your microphone and turn your video on or off. You can see a list of who is in this meeting by clicking on participants at the bottom. You can also rename yourself here as well as raise your hand. You can also view the chat room by clicking chat. This chat feature is a great way to ask questions or add comments without interrupting the speaker or person presenting. We do ask that the chat discussion remain on topic and respectful. It is also part of the public record for this meeting. Lastly, if you would like to raise your hand or use any other Zoom reactions, click on Zoom reactions at the bottom of the screen. If you need any technical assistance, please send us a chat. I'd like to welcome the people we have on our Spanish conference line today. Our interpreters are Mark Gutierrez and Leticia Reyna. I want to thank them in advance for their help. If anyone needs to join this conference line, the phone number and participant passcode are listed on this slide. We do ask that you please mute yourself during the presentation. You can mute yourself on the conference line by pressing *6, or you can also use the mute feature on your phone. At the end of our presentation, we will have an opportunity for questions and answers. During that time, you can unmute yourself on the conference line and let the interpreter know that you have a question, and your question will be passed on to us. This slide provides a list of acronyms you will hear throughout the presentation. It's here for your reference as we move through the presentation. You may be familiar with certain acronyms such as CERP and CAMP, but we wanted to provide you a list of acronyms to include some that you may not be as familiar with. Please note this workshop features 2 parts. After we discuss the blueprint revision and take a short break, we will move into topic 2, which is this year's community selection process. If you only intend to listen in on the community selection portion, feel free to leave the meeting and come back and join us at 5:30 p.m. During this current part of the workshop, you will hear from us about what the blueprint is and why we're updating it, our timeline and deliverables for this update, and a draft of how we plan to engage for this effort, and an expanded outline of what Blueprint 2.0 will include. Once we share this basic information, we want to have a discussion with you and hear your questions, comments, and suggestions on our plans for engagement and our expanded outline. And again, as we're going along, feel free to put questions in the chat. Please know that we will have several other opportunities for discussion about Blueprint 2.0, and we will share those details when we describe our draft engagement plan. So AB 617 was signed into law in 2017. CARB and air districts were tasked by the legislature to implement this law. CARB created the Office of Community Air Protection to help implement the program. One of the first things we had to do was develop guidance, what we call the blueprint. CARB developed and adopted, after a multi-stakeholder engagement process, the Community Air Protection Blueprint, which is our statewide strategy to reduce emissions of toxic air contaminants and criteria pollutants in communities highly burdened by cumulative exposure. If the AB 617 statute is the what, the blueprint is the how. There are a few reasons why we are updating the blueprint. First, AB 617 requires CARB to update the statewide strategy every 5 years. In addition to this requirement, we've received a lot of feedback over the last 5 years about the program that we'd like to incorporate into the new blueprint. Finally, we know we need to go beyond what is in the current blueprint in order to support more communities. For CARB, this means reimagining the program together while considering the 4 main pillars of the Community Air Protection Program, shown in the figure at the right. The process to update the blueprint will be iterative, and the figure on the right highlights the main inputs we will be using to craft a Blueprint 2.0. This includes engaging with communities, air districts, the public, and the AB 617 consultation group, and of course the input we have received and the input we will seek from our stakeholders through our upcoming Blueprint engagement activities. We also want to highlight how the People's Blueprint that was authored by a small group of environmental justice leaders from the AB 617 consultation group will significantly inform the program blueprint revision. We cannot stress enough that we want to create a Blueprint 2.0 in a collaborative and meaningful way. Our engagement actions around the blueprint will focus on community, racial equity, and environmental justice. The program itself has multiple milestones over the next year. To meet our statutory deadline to update the blueprint, we will be continuing to conduct our outreach and engagement from now until September of 2023. In February of 2023, we will conduct our 5th annual community selection process and recommend new AB 617 communities to our board to join the program, which we will be discussing in the second session this evening. We will also provide the board an annual AB 617 program progress update. We will be taking public comments before finalizing this updated report. Finally, we are tracking the implementation of the Air District Expedited Best Available Retrofit Control Technology, or what we refer to as BARCT, schedules on our webpage. Districts are expected to implement BARCT on industrial sources by December 31st, 2023. In May of this year, we shared a draft high-level outline of Blueprint 2.0 with the CARB board, while we continue to engage with the consultation group on the People's Blueprint. As a result of those discussions and in response to feedback we received to date on the People's Blueprint, we have expanded the outline of Blueprint 2.0. We call this our expanded concepts outline, which will be shown later in the presentation. We plan to release a draft of Blueprint 2.0 in narrative form Q1 or early Q2 of 2023. From the release of draft Blueprint 2.0 until September of 2023, we will be working towards developing a proposed final draft. Our board hearing is scheduled for September 28th, 2023, when we will recommend that the board adopt the proposed final draft of Blueprint 2.0. Every phase of developing Blueprint 2.0 will include outreach and engagement to inform our work. During our engagement process, we intend to engage with partners and stakeholders, including air districts, the AB 617 consultation group members, community steering committees, community-based environmental justice organizations, business, industry, California tribal governments, academia, other state, local, and federal government representatives, local planning department representatives, and other AB 617 program stakeholders. We plan to use different ways of engaging, focused small group one-on-one conversations, webinars, public workshops, in-person meetings, and we would appreciate being invited to any standing meetings or gatherings you think we should attend. We will also provide options to submit written comments through each phase of our engagement process as well. We will continue to engage with the AB 617 consultation group, which CARB relies on for advice about the statewide strategy for the program. Each consultation group meeting also has a public comment portion. While it is critical to understand how the experience of community steering committees so far should inform Blueprint 2.0, we also want to have meaningful dialogue with representatives of communities that have not yet been selected. This will help us identify other ways to help more communities in need. We want to note that although there aren't any tribal government communities in any of our selected communities, some tribes have benefited from receiving community air grants. As part of our upcoming engagement plan, we want to build and improve tribal relationships to discuss with California tribes areas of collaboration and solutions to cumulative exposure concerns. As we engage with stakeholders to update the blueprint, we will share the progress we are seeing throughout the 17 communities currently in the program and for the program as a whole. It's important that we focus on finding innovative ways and new opportunities to bring more benefits to communities in need throughout the state. In May of this year, we released an initial draft outline of concepts for public comment. After receiving more input, those initial draft concepts have now been expanded to reflect the questions that each section of the blueprint will address. A way to answer questions a community member may ask about the program in the blueprint draft document. This list only represents topics, and the full list of questions can be found in the link pasted in the chat. Instead of walking through this list, we'll highlight the concepts or new changes that have been proposed for Blueprint 2.0 instead. Here are concepts 9 through 19. They include much of the same topics from the initial outline, such as the vision for the program with the focus on equity and environmental justice, building capacity for both communities and agency staff who work in the program, community steering committee governance, and implementing a community emissions reduction plan. While the current blueprint translated the language of AB 617 law into an implementation guide to kick off the program, we now have real-world experience from the first years of implementation. On the left side of this graphic in blue, you can see some of the main elements that were the focus of Blueprint 1.0, things specifically called for in the law. We've heard the call to have program benefits reach more communities, so many of the new blueprint elements touch on new approaches towards reducing the air pollution burden of communities beyond those selected specifically for camp or SERP development. We also have learned a lot from the People's Blueprint, which touches on equity, civil rights and environmental justice, CSC governance, onboarding, conflict resolution, budgeting, roles, responsibilities, and capacity building for various stakeholders engaged in the program. Highlighted in yellow on the right side of the circle are some of the new approaches and guidance we are proposing to include in the Blueprint 2.0 draft. These new approaches are informed by the People's Blueprint, public comments at CARB board meetings, AB 617 consultation group discussions, CSC meetings, and focused discussions with program stakeholders. They include guidance and best practices on governance, funding transparency, and participatory budgeting. To improve our enforcement work, CARB is experimenting with working much more directly with the community groups, and we wish to highlight this approach in Blueprint 2.0. This approach, what we'll call a local SERPs approach or community action plan approach, is already happening in the San Joaquin Valley. Coalition of Valley-based community-based organizations, or CBOs, are using CARB's community air grant funds to develop local SERPs with community-convened local CSCs in 3 communities in the Valley. We are also encouraging broader use of CAP incentive funds, including use in non-selected communities. These funds could be used for a number of project types and can be a way to transfer solutions from one community to another. Updates to the CAP incentive guidelines will start in Q1 of 2023. So here are a few questions to kick off our discussion of Blueprint 2.0 expanded concept outline. We'll paste that link to the document again in the chat. I'm going to read the questions first, and then we'll come back to question 1 to begin our discussion before we move on to the next question. What are examples of good or promising practices that should be lifted up in Blueprint 2.0? What are those practices? Which areas? What elements are missing from this outline or from the approaches we just highlighted as new in the Blueprint 2.0? What is working well in your community steering committee? And what else would you like to share about this outline? So we'll go back to question 1. What are examples of good or promising practices that should be lifted up in the Blueprint 2.0?
Please feel free to raise your hand feature down at the bottom of your screen. Can you think of some examples that are promising in your specific area? Or perhaps you've seen some good examples regionally.
Yeah, Melinda, and one thing that I can think of that actually led to a change kind of before this revision was that we saw many communities adopt third-party facilitation, and that seemed to really help in some community steering committees. So we tried to expand that to our community. So yeah, if there's anything like that you all can think of that is something that can be translated and used in other communities, that'd be great.
Again, anyone who would like to share, and don't be shy and start us off with the conversation, please feel free to either use your raise hand function or go ahead and just unmute yourself.
Or use the chat too. That works too. If people would rather write their comments than verbally express them, that's great too.
Hi, Moses. I see you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Get it going. So, everybody, I know we're getting at the end of the day, but no need to be shy. So I'll be the first one to kind of get out there and get the ball rolling as a community member. So quick, if I can introduce myself, my name is Moses Huerta. I'm a resident here in the city of Paramount. I'm also a former public safety commissioner here in the city. And I am currently working on an EPA project that's funded in the community on studying hexavalent chromium. Just a quick to point out to get the conversation started, what I think is a good example and promising is the what I've seen so far is actually starting the larger conversation and getting communities involved. What I've seen in what I've learned in the last few years, not only involved with CAR, but also in our local air quality district with AQMD, that residents have been starting to be more aware, and this has helped. And this outline, especially with AB 617, has helped a lot to start bringing community members to be aware and to be participating, that they have an opportunity to influence and speak of how they want to affect their community. I can tell you firsthand in my experience here in my small town that has helped not only to educate myself. I'm new to this environmental justice and the air quality and so on and so forth. And what I give a lot of credit to the knowledge that I've acquired through not only AB 617, but also the opportunities to engage, for example, like CARB and AQMD. So I just want to start there. That I think that's a huge plus, and we keep encouraging that. And there will be more progressing, and the more engagement, the more voices, the better we're going to be able to understand down to the micro level of our in our communities. What are the issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Moises. Appreciate you just kind of sharing with us some of the insight that you have in the city of Paramount. I think that's very helpful for us. We are definitely taking notes, so thank you for sharing about that. Are there others?
Yeah. Well, yeah, Melinda, I do see that Monique kind of reinforced in the chat. We've heard a lot, the idea of participatory budgeting for sure within the program. We're dealing with incentives and the compensation with CBOs. We value all the participation of the public, and for better force in our society, we value stuff with money, right? So the idea of paying people for their time, I think, is critical. And yeah, so that's great. We've heard that quite a bit. And then also Christy with kind of using some strategies that are kind of less traditional, but you're seeing a lot of co-benefits, like creating green spaces can absorb carbon, right? And maybe even act as barriers for exposure to air pollution, but it can also lead to areas where people can exercise or congregate. So that idea of getting like multiple benefits from a strategy is noted.
Thanks.
I just
Alright.
want to check in with the Spanish line and make sure we have no questions over there.
One sec.
And Terry, just in the interim, do you see that? I think Femi has his hand
No
raised.
comments.
Yeah, thank you. And just let me introduce myself really quickly. My name is Femi Olalawoye. I'm the chief of the community planning branch. So working with this team that oversees this process and the process we'll be talking about later in the afternoon. I wanted to kind of probe what Moses, what you were mentioning earlier, particularly when we talk about how do we allow for communities, particularly, residents and members to really get involved in this process and other processes. One of the things we're thinking about in turn, and we have this term for it that we call onboarding. And it's in a sense trying to help folks understand our process, other processes across the agencies. And something that we're trying to deploy in assistance to that is really trying to establish some tools that folks can really look at to try to understand certain elements of the program, maybe in further detail, maybe other elements that they might be interested in. So we're establishing tools for that. I was wondering if you had any in mind that maybe might have helped, with you, or maybe you might have heard that have helped. And I would open that up to everyone else as well. Thinking about, are there tools that would help you become a little bit more familiar with our process, with our program? Are there ones that you're already aware of that we do that maybe we should highlight a little bit more? Just thinking along those lines as well. I know that's an additional question, but again, I thought about it, Moses, as you were talking, so I was wondering what you thought.
Thank you for the question. And this, as we're meeting now, is huge tool. Zoom. This is the ability for us to meet online versus, for example, going to the meetings, traveling. Somebody in these communities that are, low income or don't have the ability, they want to be involved, but they can't go to the meetings that could be further away. Public transportation might be available. This is one amazing tool of us looking at each other and speaking now has been a game changer, in my opinion. That's helped. The ability now in the multilingual, also engaging the technology has been helpful. Mi español ha improvisado mucho más con estos programas. It's improved me a lot more hearing a lot of the big words in Spanish. So it definitely is another benefit. I could just on the basic level here, I think it's been super helpful. The PowerPoint presentations, the documentation that's been able to be not only shared like this, but also handing out, that's been helpful more to communicate. I think that's just off the top of my head, just from your question directly, I could tell you now, for me has been such an encouragement to be here and have this conversation, get involved, that allowing me, I feel, inclusive. I feel that my voice can be heard. I can feel that I can contribute. I might not be at a PhD level, but I can tell you here at the front line, I see this, issue here, the pollution there, so on and so forth, to share that, and we can share in that knowledge. So sorry, I kind of ramble on there, but hopefully that answers it.
No, that really helps. Thank you for that. And I think one of the things we're really trying to really pay a lot of attention to as we design this process, in a sense, is really being as accessible as we can, and making the program as accessible as possible, making our tools, making whatever literature we're providing for people to read as understandable as possible, and all those elements you're talking about. So that really helps. So thank you for that comment.
So I see we have a
So-
couple of folks that have answered some, put some points in the queue. I'm sorry, Moses, if you wanted to continue. We'll certainly circle back with you, and I appreciate your comments. But I also too wanted to just highlight some of the comments that were received in the chat from Jasmine and Adrian and Monique and Rita. And Christy mentioned that there are some elements missing, but money needs to be set aside to replant and plant indigenous trees to the area to help absorb carbon and improve quality of life. And Adrian mentioned that we get a bigger bang for our buck comparison of SERP strategies. So what is the most effective for the money is the question that he asks. And then Jasmine mentioned that compensating community-based organizations and community members and green spaces is very important. Monique also mentioned that making SERP and CAMP documents more user-friendly and accessible are helpful to the community. So some ideas are infographic, signs, and interactive online info. But I want to stop there and just circle back with Rita if you want to open your line and provide feedback on, so I think we're not yet on question 2, but I want to just circle back with Moses. If you want to continue any additional points on question 1, you have the floor before we move on to question 2.
No, thank you. No, I think I think just there to get us going and thinking about so far. I think those are the big highlights. And just off the top of my head, I think it's promising that I think we should continue to do. But I'd like to give the opportunity for others to chime in as well.
Okay, we appreciate you. Thank you for all your comments. And so I see Catherine Higgins from South Coast and Lily Wu from that's also in the queue. So Catherine, if you wanted to go ahead.
Yes, thanks so much, Belinda, and good afternoon, everyone. Really support the comments that Moses made as well. Wanted to just respond a little bit to question number 1 is one thing that an example should be carried on to Blueprint 2.0 is recognizing the uniqueness of each community and its preference for leadership. In the sense that going into the early years, the Blueprint recognizes, that leadership should be co-shared with the air districts and communities. What we have found looking back is that, what makes sense in terms of leadership for one community may not be the same as the next. So we have several different types of leadership that have emerged with South Coast AQMD communities. Consisting of either staff-led, co-host, and co-lead. In the case of our last community, South LA, that was adopted. So that's something that should be continued. It's mentioned in the People's Blueprint. I think it's also commented on in the 2.0 Blueprint, but just want to emphasize that should be uplifted. That, whatever the leadership is, it should make sense for that community, and it's completely different. At least for our 6 communities here in South Coast. The other thing that should be uplifted, and now we have the benefit of hindsight on looking at what trust and trust building and listening looks like. So going into Blueprint 2.0, really, diving into what that looks like and providing lessons learned for listening. We have the opportunity to turn the corner on what that looks like with South Coast and our last community, South LA. But to the extent that trust building, listening sessions, again, the shared leadership can continue to take place. That's something that should be uplifted and, specific examples given in Blueprint 2.0. So just wanted to highlight that, for each of the communities. So there was an example of something that came out of our San Bernardino community where I'm not recalling the details, but one of a student actually did a study, and there was a color-coded chart that was provided on what the amount of listening versus talking, how it started out in San Bernardino, Muscogee, and then how that changed over time. Over the last year or so. And so the color coding was like red, for example, where our staff was speaking, and blue when the community members were speaking. But over time, we incorporated community members giving testimonials at the very beginning of each of our CSC meetings so that their voices and experiences, again, testimonials or updates, were highlighted and prioritized above hearing South Coast staff voices. So that's just one example. Where it was measured, there was some, again, the clarity that were shared in terms of the color coding was phenomenal for us to see, and that would love to see something like that captured across communities, because otherwise we tend to, I think the tendency is to just have a perception, but unless there's some metrics and data attached to it, the colors were phenomenal, then we tend to not be able to measure what trust and listening looks like. So that's just something I wanted to share.
Thank you, Catherine. I think you definitely highlighted some great points. That leadership, listening sessions, trust building are really key important points, but it has to make sense for, different communities for what is the right fit. So thank you so much for bringing that up and lifting that up. Lily, you want to go ahead and
Yeah,
share?
thank you so much for all that's been said so far. I think to kind of categorize a little bit of the promising practice, at least from a support agency standpoint, and recognizing how much incredible work from different entities, whether they be different divisions of CARB or different air districts, or even different community who have similar problems. One thing that I agree with Moses about your point about the Zoom is an incredible technology. I'm able to go to a meeting in Imperial and then go to like Fresno and then go to like IBC. So from that standpoint, it definitely gives me a good, I think, overview of differences and similarities. And one thing that I consistently see as Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, working as a toxicologist and trying to make sense of the toxics and then the health outcome, is that one common theme is what pollutant is worse for me. And while that will take some time to figure out scientifically, I think one of the things that is helpful is that understanding the path to figuring out these different data sets. We have so many different ways of entry points, and with that comes the complexity of how to engage. So to kind of uplift your point, Catherine, I think some practices for agency partners, how to engage, and then for community members, what you think is helpful as different particular staff try to help community, and maybe not having that individual trust yet, but if you trust like the air district or the CARB staff or OEHA, then I think it would be helpful for us to know what aspect of our engagement you think should be propagated for when we try to bring new staff into this, that we have this working kind of set of guidelines for how we engage, and at what point are our talking points too complex, or is it feel like helpful? Just some guidance, I think, back and forth is very helpful for even me as OEHA working with different communities at different stages of 617. So that was my 2 cents.
Thanks, Lily. We really appreciate that. So really quickly, I just want to make sure that we also address some of the questions in the chat. So I'm going to just bring our branch manager, Femi, online to answer just one of the questions that we have in the chat. Femi, really quickly before we turn over to question 2, I think
Yes, thank you, Melinda. I'm trying to scroll back up to the question to make sure I capture it right. So there was a question about bang for your buck, and it really kind of leans into the aspect of cost effectiveness as we talk about incentives. So we really wanted to post for you guys, and it's in the chat, a link to our incentives dashboard. It gives you a feel for how the funding is being spent and where that's happening and where the reductions are had there. So it's a really good resource, really good tool for you guys to get a good feel for how cap incentives are. The discussion on cap incentives, as Terry mentioned earlier, there will be a separate process that will provide a little more detail on the cap incentives process in general. And that will start in earnest next year, early next year. So we'll make sure that, we'll try to make sure everyone is aware of when that process is starting as well. And there was a second question here. Oh, replanting and planting of indigenous trees. So this is another element that could be implemented as part of a community emission reduction program and then funded through cap incentives through that mechanism. So really look forward to working with you guys and understanding how to approach that. And then once that is reflected in the community emission reduction program itself, we can start to develop the incentive project plan that can support that. And your district and communities will work together on putting that together, and we can also help as well as needed. So just wanted to make sure that I uplifted those 2 comments and provided some responses there. Again, let me know if there are any other questions regarding that particular piece, and I can try to add in as much as I can on that, but hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Femi. So I think we're a little bit wrapped up there for question 1. And I think we're going to move on to question 2, which is what elements are missing from this outline or from the approaches we just highlighted as new in Blueprint 2.0. So Rita, thank you so much for patiently waiting. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your hospitality. My name is Rita Loof, and I'm the Director of Environmental Affairs for RADTech International. RADTech is a nonprofit organization of businesses involved in ultraviolet electron beam and light emitting diode technology, that's UV, EB, LED, and we're essentially a low VOC technology for inks and coatings that can replace existing conventional technologies. And so we are very interested in creating a way for businesses in the South Coast to transition and to help them transition rather than seeing them leave the state. As far as what's missing, one of the things that we've seen is basically that the business community is not really at the table at some of the CERT meetings. I serve on the local government small business advisory committee at the South Coast AQMD. I've served for over a decade as a member of that committee, and this is something that we've heard in our committee, and I've certainly expressed those thoughts as well, that there is no mechanism for the business community to be a participant in some of these meetings. So I would definitely encourage more engagement with the business community so we can foster those partnerships, because ultimately, you know, it's the businesses that have to buy into the idea of implementing a new technology, for example, and we definitely need them as partners. So as a trade organization, we were told that we're not eligible to participate as members of some of the community steering committees. And the local businesses that we represent, like in our case, we're a national organization. We represent about 800 members. The local businesses could be small or medium-sized businesses. They just don't have the manpower to be able to send somebody to a committee. They just don't have the ability to do that. So they rely on organizations like us to be their voice. So one of the things that I think could be implemented is simply having a policy to allow businesses to be at the table at these community steering committees. And then in addition, to try to analyze some of the barriers that the regulations impose on businesses who want to do the right thing and want to convert to less polluting alternatives. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Rita. We appreciate you highlighting the benefits to partnering with businesses and business interests in this process. So thank you. Before I turn it over to Jeff, I just wanted to give Monique a chance, an opportunity to speak to her comment in the chat. I can read it off, or Monique, you're welcome to also open up your line and speak verbally, either way.
Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of reiterate what I stated. This is more for question number 2. Just would really love some guidance in how to work with tribes on a government to government consultation basis, even in locations where it's not necessarily reservation land, but how could we do more to move beyond like land acknowledgements in our work in other in spaces where you know, the local tribes may not have been granted like specific like hold to title of land. And if there's been other examples of how that maybe has worked in other air districts, I'd love to learn from other folks as well. The other thing too is that the San Diego Air Pollution Control District doesn't have any written guidance in terms of how they've done that before in the past, or how they like to do that moving forward. So if there's also guidance that or any written guidance that other air districts have and how that's done, that would be also helpful in us to kind of start exploring that as we're trying to do things in a more just way.
Thank you, Monique. We really appreciate that. I think it's helpful to understand what's unique to the San Diego Air Basin region. So thank you so much. So I will then turn it over to Jeff Kilbreth.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm on the Richmond, North Richmond, San Pablo steering committee for the AB 617 program. So I wanted to both support and provide a caution and maybe amplify the point that Rita just made. My personal background is business. My whole life is I've been in business. And so I'm not, anti-business or unaware of the kind of planning and the kind of work that has to be done to help business help all of us have a better environment. I'm totally in favor of that. And in our steering committee, we have two non-voting members, one from Chevron, because our situation is dominated to some significant degree by hosting the biggest refinery in the state. But we have another person from another industrial company. They're non-voting. I don't agree with that. I think that business should get a vote. I don't know actually exactly where the idea came of to, as it were, treat them as if they were second-class citizens. I think we have a 27-person steering committee. I would think that we would want, 4 or 5 people from business, and I would think that they ought to vote. So that's just a personal observation about how we got to where we are. But the thing I wanted to bring up, in addition to generally favoring totally and supporting what Rita said about the importance of having a plan for business involvement, is that it's also important to not be, fooled or to be ignorant when negotiating pollution reduction with business. And I'll give you a very concrete example, and if anybody's interested, we could take it offline. Chevron, as I said, operates the biggest refinery in the state of California in Richmond. This refinery, depending on the price of oil and gasoline, the prices they're able to get at the pump and from jet fuel, et cetera, this refinery makes, on average, $500 to $700 million a year in net profit to the corporation. When BACMD, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, wanted to have a rule that would force Chevron to put a wet scrubber on their main catalytic converter, which was a very important, it's the biggest thing we could do in the entire area in the next 10 years to reduce particulate matter in our area. And so it's a great idea, and they did a terrific job explaining why it was affordable, why it was necessary, and all of that. But when they actually had to show that it was affordable, they hired a consultant to tell them what Chevron's profitability was. BACMD wasn't able to read the financial statements themselves and outsourced it to a consulting firm. And lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, the consulting firms that claim to understand the finances of Chevron are in some way biased towards Chevron. And so what they proceeded to do is to come up with a number of $282 million a year on average for profitability of this refinery, which would suggest that the number 2 oil company in the world was operating at 2.8%, profit margin, which is simply not true. They're very well run. They would never run a business like this at 2.8%. So here we are with a problem of not appreciating fully whether a company can afford. Is it feasible? Is it reasonable? Okay, so my point here is that there has to be stronger understanding of the economics associated with both companies' profitability, i.e. what they can afford and what is reasonable, but also the benefit against that, and the cost and the benefits of various requirements. So, we look at Chevron and we could imagine asking Chevron to spend $100 million a year on pollution reduction. And, if they only made 200 million, maybe that's unreasonable. But if they make 600 or 700 million, it's much more reasonable. Do you know what I mean?
Jeff, excuse me, I don't mean to hop in here. I want to appreciate your point, and I think
good. All right, I'm done. Sorry to be so long-winded.
I wanted to say that we appreciate you sharing with us that it is very important to have business interests and business perspective in this process, and we appreciate that. So again, I want to thank you.
But I'm also saying, excuse me, I'm
Uh-huh.
also saying that it's important for us to understand the economics of business.
Absolutely.
So we don't get fooled into thinking something is infeasible or unreasonable when in fact it's utterly feasible and completely reasonable.
Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate that point.
Yeah, real
Thank
quick,
you.
Melinda, just to Jeff, you brought up a point just to say that many of our previous communities have had this discussion about how much do they want to incentivize businesses that they think may be able to purchase and install emission controls on their own. So that is the topic that does come up in communities like across the state in our program so far. So yeah.
Correct. We don't need to give Chevron incentives. We need them to share their profits with pollution reduction.
And I think there's others in the chat that would agree with you, Jeff. Christy had a question. Is there some websites or articles that you could share on that topic? So if you have some maybe examples that you could share in the chat, we'd appreciate it. I also want to give others opportunity to speak on question 2, but I just also too want to just kind of do a time check that we want to just also to allow for others to speak on perhaps questions 3 and 4 if they have questions or comments on those topics. So really quickly, we have Moses. Did you want to speak to question 2? Just want to do a check.
Yeah, and I'll make a quick just to kind of reference in the previous comments, engagement between community and businesses. I tell you from my experience here in the city, there was an invitation by the community or the city itself, and invited the businesses to talk with the residents, understand them, learn from them, speak with them, to start that dialogue and understanding what they're going through. I participated in these conversations, and I was able to speak to these companies. What are you experiencing? What are your barriers? We have to start building that trust and that conversation. So I want to put that, if I can, and maybe that's something that we're missing in starting that conversation. In engaging where we need to break that barrier in what we're trying to move forward. I think businesses I know want to do the right thing. Those that do good businesses want to do the right thing and are willing to listen, and the community understanding what they're going through, what their barriers are, and maybe providing support. I can tell you in my first hand, I've helped to support some incentives to help some of the, like for example, small businesses who don't have the big funds, but help them because they want to do the right thing. And also really quick on in conversation and businesses being part of, we just finished a rule with the AQMD, and I think AQMD can speak to that, where businesses we were in dialogue together. We worked on this rule together with businesses. What are your barriers? This is what my community is looking forward to see, that what is the business able to do, and we actually was a constructive dialogue. This rule was able to be finalized and actually passed by the board. And it was done in good faith and going forward. So I think if we can see that more and learning from that lesson, how we engage in that conversation with industry, community, and all other parties that are involved in an issue, I think that would be a big benefit in going forward if that can be added on. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we're going to change gears. Terry, I'm going to turn it over to you to read question 3 as we move into question 3. So Terry, if you wouldn't mind taking over for.
Yeah, question number 3. What is working well in your community steering committee or your community? And maybe while people are thinking of some options, we can check in with the Spanish line, see if there's any questions over there.
Checking.
Thank you. Genevieve, I see you have your hand raised.
Hi, thank you. Yes, Genevieve Amsterdam with the Central California Environmental Justice Network. This question brought to mind something that I've appreciated in the Fresno CSC, which is all of the air monitoring work that has happened in that community and what it's brought to light, and the fact that the monitoring sensors and equipment are really high quality. And so it's kind of, we can all accept what's coming from that equipment as fact, which is really helpful. And so moving forward, you know, if a community would be assigned as for a community air monitoring network, I think it could be really helpful that we expand our idea of what a community is. So perhaps we could have a monitoring network for, you know, the whole county of Stanislaus or the whole county of Tulare, so that we're getting more information in rural areas and having a better understanding of what's happening over a larger scale rather than in just one neighborhood. So that would be kind of one thing that I thought went well, and one way we could potentially move forward with a tweak to the program so it could kind of allow for more project types. Thank you.
Thank you, Genevieve. And so anybody else, if you're thinking about this question, maybe you're on a CSC now. What type of advice would you give a new CSC member today? And why would you give them that advice?
Can I actually ask a question while folks are thinking? I want to actually ask Genevieve a question just with regard to monitoring. I was wondering if you were thinking about a particular area that had the monitors that you felt were really effective, whether there be, you know, in a particular district or with regard to a certain community. I don't know. You might have mentioned that, but if so, I missed it. I wanted to just kind of follow up on your question there, or on your comment there.
Yeah, of course. What's been helpful is I'm part of the South Central Fresno Community Steering Committee. And so we've deployed more monitors and ones that are of like federal reference grade quality monitors in the many neighborhoods that didn't currently have them. And we found that the Southwest and West Fresno neighborhoods actually read higher for PM 2.5 than any of the other especially the regulatory grade monitors that are used to judge compliance with the federal clean air standards. So that's something that community has been saying, that they're being, you know, unjustly impacted by high levels of pollution. And then communities put purple air monitors and found the same data, but now we actually have monitoring data that all agencies can agree is true. So it's kind of helped confirm what we already know, but now we can move forward, hopefully, in improving kind of permanent monitoring in those neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you for that. That really helps, and again, just wanting to get a good feel for, you know, practices that you're all seeing that you really would like us to highlight or uplift as part of this process, or potentially speak a little bit more to as part of the blueprint itself. So again, just thank you for your comment and inviting anyone else to add in or on that question as well.
I was trying to raise
Jeff, I see your hand is up.
Okay, hi, my name is Ariana Harrison. I am
Hi, I'll be really quick this time. Our problem, spending a lot of money in Richmond, North Richmond, San Pablo, and Backwood, on our behalf. We're spending a lot of money on monitoring, but most of that money is being spent monitoring a small subset of the toxics. It's unclear, maybe, exactly what percentage of what we should be monitoring is, but my observation is that CARB has not provided a plan or any assistance or any analysis of which tax and caps are most important to monitor. And right now, we've identified, basically 20 tax and 3 caps that we're worried about and which drives the health problems we have. And of those 20 toxic air contaminants, only 3 or 4 are being monitored. All the others that are on the top risk list are not being monitored. So the monitoring is a lot of energy and activity, but on an incomplete target. And we'd like to know, is it because it's too expensive to monitor the others? Or, why are we only monitoring 3 or 4 of the top 20 toxic air contaminants?
Thank you, Jeff. Arian, and please let me know if I mispronounced your name.
sorry, I got one name. My name is Ariana Harrison. I'm the founder of Marie Harrison Community Foundation.
I'm sorry, Arian. It's very, very hard to hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can't use the earplugs. Okay. My name is Ariane Harrison. I am the executive and founder of Marie Harrison Community Foundation, Inc. for social and environmental justice in San Francisco, Bayview, Hunters Point. I'm really glad to be here. We're new coming into AB 617. We're just getting started with the process for San Francisco. And I'm just in the recruiting phase right now, but I'm hearing a lot of good stuff. And I'm glad that I was able to be here today to get familiar and meet you all, because it's very important to us that we at some point start engaging with other communities that have already participated in the process to see what some of the barriers have been and some of the challenges and things that we have in common. And just, working cohesively across the board to make sure that we do a good job. This is our first time taking on something like this, but a lot of it is pretty familiar, and I'll just look forward to doing this process. Also, I just wanted to mention that I do have an event this evening at probably about, I have to be there no later than 5:45. So please forgive me if I have to excuse myself from the meeting early, but I will definitely be back because I'm so extremely interested in hearing all the feedback and the things that you guys have to say. So happy holidays, and thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Happy holidays to you too, and thank you for joining us. So maybe we can look at question number 4. What else would anybody like to share about the outline that was presented earlier? I don't know if it would help to maybe go back to the slides of the outline for people to do a quick review, but the link to the slides are in the chat as well.
I'll also add, folks, that, please feel free to send us any comments or questions that you have. We'll have contact information coming up towards the end of the presentations as well. So please don't consider this your only opportunity. Also, as mentioned, we'll be having this process throughout the rest of the next year up until September. So definitely look forward to any additional comments that you may have. But and also please feel free to use the chat as well, as some of you have been doing as well. So, but definitely look forward to any ideas and comments you guys will have. We definitely want to take into account as part of this process.
Feel free to go to any of the other questions as well. This is really our open time. Anything else that may have occurred to folks?
Moses?
Thank you. Really quick, just something that came up to mind in the question in the monitoring. At least here locally in our district, monitoring is something that the communities are relying on in gathering that information. More, it's to keep it in context, is to understand what is affecting us. But I know that barriers, at least in the conversations I've had or I've been involved in, that it's getting proper monitors, the equipment, the hardware, the resources, or the tools, I guess, if you will, to have in these communities, especially in the AB 617. So when the communities are asking for that, having the tools in a timely manner. In my personal experience, I've had where it took 6 months to get a FRM monitor, the field reference monitor, which as was alluded to earlier, or mentioned earlier in the monitoring. So, that's a lot of information being lost that we're not getting in a timely manner. So I think if we can add that onto the conversation, or maybe a perspective as we go in the level of communities, when we start asking how do we understand, what are the tools we need? Are those tools available? Can we get them in a timely manner? I think if I can throw that in. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Ariane has her hand up, and I don't know if that was from the previous
I'm lowering
question.
it. Yeah, it was. I'm going to lower it. Sorry, you guys.
Appreciate that. Jeff?
Again, quick, I think Moses is talking about the same issue I was bringing up before. We need a master for people in industrial communities, and most of the SERP communities are industrial communities. We need a strategy for monitoring and an idea of what's really valuable about monitoring and what can be done well by monitoring and what should be monitored by monitoring. But there are other things, especially if you have an industry as complicated as refining and any petrochemical plant. I mean, it's not just, oil, gasoline and jet fuel. It's also plastics and, anything petrochemical. It's sufficiently complicated that to get your arms around, I mean, Chevron emits over 150 different pollutants, 150, right? And, this is a lot. So we can't escape the fact that we also need to do a lot of modeling, which is a completely different thing from monitoring. And, bottom line is, I don't think we have an integrated master plan for complex industrial communities to get the right amount of monitoring and the right amount of modeling. I know that our problem in my area is that we're not monitoring, 85% of the toxic air contaminants that are causing health problems. And our problem with modeling is insufficient staff at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. It's just, there's so many questions to answer and so much work that needs to be done, not enough people to do it. They're doing great work. There aren't enough of them to really be on top of the emissions. So, that's how I'd like to say that, we need a plan for both, and that the two are they go together, if you know what I mean. You should really have a plan that gives guidance, guidelines, and budget to allow a good integrated plan for monitoring and modeling.
Thank you for that feedback, Jeff. So we'll move on to the last question that we have here. I just want to thank everyone for participating in this discussion so far. We've seen many different activities like teaming together to draft CSC meetings and facilitating training for the community on topics of community interest, like understanding the California Environmental Quality Act that helps CSCs and air districts work together to convene and write SERPs. These activities help build community capacity to work and collaborate on developing the SERP. So the question we're asking is, what are other ways we can support communities besides the current model of selection by the air districts, with air districts convening the community steering committee and writing the SERP?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Rita. We see your hand.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the ways that we've suggested to the South Coast AQMD is to bring in the trade associations that are representing some of the impacted businesses, because a lot of the times they're loath to participate in meetings with the regulators, but they'll participate with us because they know it's a comfort zone. We don't have the power to issue notices of violations or anything like that. So they'll get the information from us and they'll reach out to us, but they won't do that at an air district level. So to the extent that you can partner with, the larger association of businesses, and I understand that there's a hesitation because, we're not from the environmental community, but we are part of the community. I mean, we also live in these communities. So I have children that have asthma, so I'm very interested in making sure the air quality is as healthy as it can be. So I'm also a stakeholder in that sense. But bringing in the trade associations, I think would be a very good step moving forward and to get that partnership going. Another thing that could be done is to analyze the barriers to implementing cleaner technologies. And obviously there's a financial issue, there's a capital investment, but a lot of the times we tend to assume that just because it's a regulation, it's going to clean the air. And I've been representing RADTech for about 28 years. Before that, I was a permit engineer for South Coast Air Quality Management District. And I can tell you from experience that I've seen many a regulation that doesn't do anything for air quality or improving the environment. Because if you're asking me to report my emissions on a piece of paper multiple times and submit more and more reports, that's not doing anything to improve air quality. So what we try to do is we try to provide incentives for businesses in the form of regulatory flexibility to get emission reductions above and beyond what is currently mandated voluntarily. And then we try to create that win-win. So, maybe thinking about that approach would be very welcome. I know for our members and for our business community. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita, for that input. Anybody else? Any other comments or concerns that you want to put out there for us? I'll get to you just 1 second, Jeff. Just want to check in. Is there anything on the Spanish line?
We're checking, but there wasn't anything earlier. 1 sec. No comments, no.
Okay, Jeff?
Okay, one last thing, which is, and I think that this is related to the idea of trying some new approaches to working collaboratively with business. I don't know if that will work. Because at the end of the day, regulation, generally speaking, will cost business money, and some businesses may not care about public health if it's going to cost money. But I do think that if our regulatory efforts were laser focused on public health, then your ability, our ability collectively to talk to business gets greatly improved. And because I think business cares about public health, just like Rita was just saying, like she cares, business cares. So that gets you to the question of what are we measuring and what are our goals for public health? And what my experience so far in the first year and a half of the North Richmond, San Pablo process has been that we kind of have some health goals for cancer reduction, but actually a lot of things we've done in the past have meant that cancer is not really the big problem. Certainly in Richmond, where our cancer rates are not noticeably different than in other parts of the state, or even in the middle class, upper middle class suburbs. What is different is chronic health, chronic respiratory health. It's night and day different. And we don't seem to have any agreed way of valuing chronic health problems. I mean, if 5 times as many kids are using inhalers and 5 times as many days are lost of school and maybe even work time, if those kind of everyday costs are not recognized, are not measured, are not valued, then how do we get to say to some business that you got to reduce your VOCs or your NOx or your sulfuric acid? I mean, we sort of, there's no goal. So that's the bottom line, is we're driving really hard to get to actual public health goals. And we'd like to then get them tied to the toxics that we believe are contributing to lower health outcomes. And then we'd like to, have programs that would actually reduce those toxics that would presumably, reduce the bad health outcomes. And that gets
All right,
you
Jeff,
to.
Sorry to cut you off. We are coming up to our end time here. Just wanted to move it along. Real quickly, anybody else have anything that they want to add? Okay.
Right, Terry, I was trying to raise my hand, but not finding the button. I would like to offer something on the second half of the second portion of the question. And that is relative to writing the CERT. So one experience that we had with our last community with South Los Angeles is that they actually authored 2 chapters in the CERT. That had not happened, with any previous committee. CSC, of course, this is our first time having co-leads, but that is one opportunity I think that air districts could support communities in elevating their voices and having their the community perspective to be shared within the CERT and captured, other than, throughout the CERT development process. We did have to, as an air district, identify that it was written by the community, so that there's some maybe policy comments and some things that were not necessarily specifically germane to the CERT, but certainly impacted that community in terms of disparities and the like. So that is one thing I could suggest for consideration for other air districts or communities. It may not be appropriate for every community, but I think to the extent that it's offered an opportunity to provide like a more comprehensive picture of the CERT or the community concerns and beyond the specific AB 617 priorities, that's something that I think we should consider, or maybe other air districts or communities might want to consider.
Thank you, Catherine. And I do apologize, time came short. Anybody that wants to have discussion with us after this, please reach out to us so we can have those discussions. However, we unfortunately are a little pressed for time, but there was a great discussion today. So this slide right here is providing just some program information and contacts. We're accepting written comments on the outline until January 19th. And you can comment using a link in the chat or by emailing communityair@arb.ca.gov. All the comments we get by email will be added to our public docket for everyone to access. Again, please feel free at any time to reach out to us. Our information's there, and we definitely want to have these conversations with you all. If there's no other questions, we'll go on to our break and reconvene at 5:30.